Hello, everybody, and welcome to Badass College Apps with Admissions Mom, where we talk about applying to college and then we stop and take a breath. I am so very excited to introduce my guest tonight. He's a college counselor, high school counselor, and just knows so much about college admissions. And he was actually the college counselor for my two younger children, and kind of where I first really kind of fell in love with college admissions, just by sitting in his office and talking to him about it. And I'm so very happy to have you here, Nick. And I'd love for you to just go ahead and take a minute and introduce yourself and tell everybody out here with us today and all of those of you watching us tomorrow. Let's learn a little bit about you, Nick, and who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first off, hello, everybody. I think with this whole college search process, I remember when I was in high school myself, I was a nervous wreck and I was in my college counselor's office all the time. Then, like many admissions officers, before you become a full-grown admissions officer, you start off as a campus tour guide. So I did that in my undergrad years. Then I got an apprenticeship at Vanderbilt, my alma mater. Eventually became an officer there, so I worked in that office. Then I also worked at American University's Koga School of Business and MBA admissions, and the University of Pennsylvania undergraduate admissions. So what I think you see a lot of folks where, we say in the industry, they go to the other side of the desk. When you're working at places that are that selective, it kind of hurts your counselor heart. It kind of hurts your educator heart, because it's actually really fun letting students into college. So I went to the high school side, started off working with Carolyn's two younger children at a school in Houston, and then I worked at a school on the East Coast about an hour south of New York City. Currently, I'm director of college counseling at a school in Cincinnati, Ohio. So worn a lot of different hats, but I'm actually going to be moving back to Houston this summer and doing independent counseling. So that's kind of my plan as of right now. But happy to help with any questions that y'all have tonight, and glad to be here.
And Nick, if anybody wants to reach out with you, do you have a way that you might want them to do so? Or
yeah, exactly. My email is Nick, Nick, and then my last name, you can see it on the screen too, ACCROCCO. So there's 4 C's in it, and then the number 610 at gmail.com. So that's Nick, Nick, ACCROCCO, number 610 at gmail.com. So happy to help with any questions that you might have.
Awesome. And I think, Carly, are you going to throw that up there for us, for him? Yeah. Is that it, Nick? Oh, you probably can't see it. Or can you see it?
Is it in the chat?
Yeah, but I'll put it up on the board too, so that you can see it. Yeah. There you go. That's it?
Yeah.
All right, great. So that's how you can reach out to Nick if you want. I'm sure that if you have questions for him, or would like to get more information from him, he'd be happy to talk to you. And Carly, tell us a little bit about you and who you are.
I'm Carly. I'm a moderator of the r/applying to college subreddit and the owner of the Discord server for applying to college. I'm a communications major at a community college in Portland, Oregon. And if you want to find me, I'm mainly on Discord, so you can talk to me about anything, whether it's about the Discord server or you're interested in communications or community college. And yeah.
All right, great. And I'm Carolyn, also known as Admissions Mom. You can kind of find me all over social media, because it's part of my mission in doing college admissions consulting is to provide as much information to as many people as possible. So you can find me on Reddit in the Applying to College subreddit, where I'm a moderator under Admissions Mom. You can find me on Instagram as Admissions Mom. You can find me on Twitter as _Admissions Mom. And actually, feel free to tag me on Discord as Admissions Mom, because I do now know that I get notifications from there. I wasn't sure about that for a while, but now I know. So feel free to reach out in any way. And those of you in the chat, I'd love to know about you and where you are. If we've got some chatters there, Nathaniel, I don't know if you're still there, but kind of like where you are and how you're doing today, chat. And while you're answering, if you're there, chat, to tell us how you are and what you're doing, let's just kind of get started. Today, we're going to talk about something that's probably weighing on a lot of seniors. But those of you who are juniors, I want you to be paying attention to this conversation because sometimes, excuse me, my phone is making noise. Because thinking about how to make the final decision can also come in really handy if you're thinking about applying early decision somewhere and kind of like really wanting to narrow that down. So it's good to just kind of have that in mind as we're thinking about it. And let's see, okay, so we've got, let's see, Nathaniel, a rainy day in Chicagoland. And we've got Yuvraj. I hope I said that correctly. You're in New Jersey, and you're deciding where to go. Oh, good. Well, I hope that you'll have some questions for us, and you can, jump in anytime, throw in your questions, and Nick or I will try to answer them. Nathaniel, I'm pretty sure you have made your decision, right? But I'm so glad you're here to support us, and you always have great advice in the chat for your fellow chat members too. So you're a great member of our community. Okay, so making the decision. Nick, in your opinion, what is the hardest part in your experience with your seniors who you've worked with or who you're working with right now? What is the hardest part of like making this final decision?
That's a great question. I think it's highly individualized depending on the student and their scenario, but there are sort of common themes that come up. And so I think one, that there's a lot of students who feel pressure to, quote, find the one.
Mm-hmm.
Might have a handful of great options or 2 or 3 that they're really excited about. And I have seen students wait till the absolute 11th hour to submit a deposit. And that always gives me a little bit of agita, to say the least. And I tell them too, I say, look, I get it, it's a big decision, but there's nothing you're going to learn in the next 24 hours that's going to give you this like clarity. So what I also tell students all the time, wherever they are in the process, is that the good news is there's hundreds of places, literally hundreds of places you can be happy at and be very successful. The bad news is you got to go find out what those are. So there are places I can say as a college counselor, like that I looked at as a college counselor, so I'm not doing my own process, that were not on my radar at all in high school, and I loved them. And so I think that should give a lot of comfort that there's a lot of pressure out there to know exactly which one, but it's kind of hard to go wrong if you've done a good search along the way. I think there's also sometimes pressure about where your friends are going or a significant other. So it's pretty rare, but I've had a couple of occasions where a student will call me the first week of classes and go, oh my goodness, I've made a mistake. And I always say, where's boyfriend or girlfriend? Always be kind of the answer. So that is something that, there's plenty of people who, went to college with their friends. I did that a little bit myself, but you just got to think about, is it right for me? It might be right for you. That's totally fine. I remember I worked with a set of fraternal twins, and they decided they wanted to be roommates in college. And the parents said in the meeting, well, is that going to work? And I said, it's worked for 18 years. So that was just kind of, how they rolled. The financial piece is another big issue here. I think sometimes students, and that's kind of sort of a good parlay to another thing, a lot of times students are really hung up on prestige, rankings. I heard that. My cousin said the food wasn't good. And that stuff, those can all be factors, but that's really not what I would recommend focusing on. I'd be focusing on, is it a good fit? If you can make that place work for you and you can see like it's going to help you meet those goals, that's what's going to matter. Because I have seen students who say, I'd really rather go to college B, but college A is ranked higher. And you go, but okay, but that doesn't mean your life's necessarily going to be different. And college A might be, ranked higher or perceived to be, quote unquote better or what have you, but it may not be the right fit for you. So I think, one thing that, Carolyn had said in her YouTube, or excuse me, her Instagram promoting this, go with your gut. I think that's a lot to be said. I've had students who visit these, really, selective, famous colleges, and they come back and they don't really like it. And I say, so you're not applying then? I said, of course I'm applying. It's whatever name. And you go, that's not really the main criteria. So those are some of the bigger hang-ups that I see happen.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, we do have a couple of comments I'm going to bring up, and then we're going to jump into some slides I have and just kind of talk about specific suggestions I have. So we've got Nathaniel, who's Bama bound. He got big time national merit from them. And so making that wise financial decision there. So he's kind of here to give us some support. And then we've got Jackie. Jackie, welcome. She's deciding, or they're deciding for pre-med, UT Austin versus UC Davis versus Tulane versus Northeastern versus UC San Diego. Wow. That's a lot of amazing choices. I think we're going to be able to really kind of talk to some things about that for you, Jackie, too. I'm going to come back to it, though, because I want to jump in and talk about a little bit more globally how to make your decision. And then we can kind of help. And then Nick and I can kind of help you parse that down, too. Okay, so let me throw up my slides here. So making the decisions, and Nick, you touched on this. The first one, and if you can't see it from where you are, don't worry, I'll just kind of talk to you about that. The first thing you touched on this a little bit, and I think is super, super important, is finances. To me, I think if a school isn't affordable, it has to go out of the running. No, almost like no matter how much you love it, how much, whatever you think about the rankings or selectivity, rejectivity of it. But, I'd like to know what you think, Nick. How do you guide people with financial decisions?
That's a great question. And it really depends on what sort of conversations the family has had on the front end. So I can tell you there's certainly parents who say, we're going to pay the bill. We have a 529 plan. We've been saving for this. Or sometimes they're actually faculty members at a university or college, and they get sometimes literally free tuition just from working there. And there's sometimes reciprocity agreements with that as well. But I think having these conversations before the decisions and the awards, just to kind of prepare. I think parents need to tell students what their expectations are and what they're willing to pay or not pay. I can tell you, I've had some families where the parents say will tell me, we're telling them that they have to pay for college, but when they graduate, we're going to actually pay, give them the money back. I mean, there's some wisdom to that, but I mean, again, it's a family conversation. But I think having those conversations on the front end is going to be really important, because when those awards come out, there's going to be a lot of emotion about some of the decisions, either very, very happy or, maybe disappointment. And the other thing too is you can call up the financial aid office and see if you can get a better award. Sometimes they can do it. Sometimes their hands are tied, but until you ask, the answer is no. But all that to say, this is definitely something to be discussing as you're waiting for the decisions, as opposed to when they happen and say, eek, we can't pay the whole amount. Last thing I'll say really quickly, I was thinking about this one student. She got essentially a full ride to one very selective institution, but she got into another very selective institution who did not give any merit money. And she had a spreadsheet of all the different, expenditures. And people always ask about tuition, but I always say, ask about the total cost of attendance, because that's books, food, all that other stuff. So she put it out for 1 year. And I said to her, no, multiply that times 4.
Right.
And over $200,000. I said, that's a house. I said, again, you're still, even if you're looking at the selectivity kind of thing, it was a pretty selective place. So
yeah, no, I think that's such a great point. And it kind of leads me to a couple of things that I want to make, some points I want to make. So juniors, sophomores, younger parents, if you're watching and your kids haven't applied to college yet, I think the most important piece of advice you can do, that I can give you to support your child, is to think about the financial aspect early on. Sit together as parents or guardians or those who love the child and really think about how much you can afford, and be honest with your child about it, because it is heartbreaking right now on our applying to college. And maybe for you, Nick, when you hear from your kids, that to hear from kids who have worked so hard to make their applications and to work on those essays, and then they get, the financial aid packet, and there's no way they can afford it. It's totally out of range. And it's because of the parent's financial situation, often, the parent on paper, maybe the parents can afford it, but they don't take into consideration like, oh, well, we've got grandparents that we have to support for the next few years or whatever. So, it's your parents' decision how much they're going to spend on your college education. But please, please, please be honest with your kids about that and have that conversation early on. The other thing I want to say, when you were talking about that $200,000 in debt, and Jackie, this is for you, especially since you said you're pre-med. As a pre-med student, I really advise to graduate with the least amount of possible debt, because you don't want to go into medical school with debt and then add on to your debt. So of those amazing options that you have right there, think about the financial situation first and which one are you going to be able to attend with the least amount of debt. That should be, to me, your primary consideration for going into medical school. Okay. So now we've kind of talked about the financial thing. That is such a priority. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is like learning as much about the college as you possibly can, right? Because honestly, these kids have, they've spent some time at home, right? They haven't been able to go on to college campuses. They haven't really been able to get that feeling of the vibe, if that was even possible for them in the first place. So I want to think about like, how can they learn as much as they possibly can about these colleges? And I'm going to interrupt myself because Nathaniel brought up a really great point. Unaffordable schools are a problem. The net price calculator, the MPC, are your friends. Yes, do that. Especially if you're juniors. Thank you, Nathaniel, for bringing up that point. And let's see, I'm going to bring up this other point that Nathaniel brought. In my opinion, finances should be involved before you even make your list. Yes, I agree. I had 20 plus schools I was interested in, and just the financial aspect alone trimmed it down to 10. No point in applying to unaffordable schools. Yeah, Nathaniel's headed to be an amazing college counselor one day, I can tell you. And you, Raj, I am going to talk about that deferred enrollment. It's a good question, but we're going to talk about how to learn more about the colleges right now. So, Nick, what do you tell your kids? Let's take this in twofold. The ones who can visit the colleges where they've been accepted, and then the ones who can't, for whatever reason, time, money, distance.
Yeah.
So let's take both of those and like, how do you suggest that they get the feel for the colleges?
That's a great question. There's lots and lots of tools, both formal and sort of informal. So a lot of times in admissions, we talk about two types of events: recruitment events, which are like, please apply to our college, and then yield events, which are, you've been admitted to our college, now we want you to enroll to yield. And so right now in the month of April, lots and lots of colleges, pretty much all of them, are having some sort of yield event. Sometimes there's, you spend the day with a student. Sometimes they have programming. Sometimes there's a sporting event. You go to a class. I mean, it's kind of all over the map, but there's a lot of those. They, of course, also have tours that you can just go on for, admitted students or prospective students. So this is great, too, if you have an older child who's been admitted and then you have a sibling who's maybe a year or two younger, they can go on that tour as well. And so you kind of get a little bit of both. The other thing is, and I feel like I say this about something every hour, but with COVID, the admissions offices had to get really creative about ways to recruit. And they actually used technology they kind of always had, but never really utilized to the extent they did. And of course, you got the virtual meetings, you've got the virtual visits. I think Tulane actually walked around campus with an iPad and would give you a tour. Like that's also talk to your own college office, either your guidance counselor or college counseling office, and see if there's students who graduate from your high school who are attending there now as a young alum. That's a great way to kind of get a feel for, kind of what it's like. Now, the other thing, too, is, of course, as you're going through this, even if you're chasing a wait list, and I'm sure we might touch on that later, you definitely want to have a deposit down before May 1. Sometimes move that date because of COVID again, but it's sort of a case-by-case basis. May 1 has traditionally been what's called National Candidate Reply Date. So that's when they want you to have a deposit down at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I'm going to throw in a few more ways that you might want to learn more about the colleges as you're making your decision. You can go on their subreddits and ask questions. Not all of them are friendly, but some of them are. And you can also get a feel for that. I suggest reading the student newspaper. What's going on in the student newspaper? What is their kind of like take on the culture of the school? Is it something that you feel comfortable with or uncomfortable with? Follow them on, check out their social media, not just the admissions social media, but the school social media. What are they promoting? Does it look like something that you're interested in? And reach out to clubs that you're interested in. If you don't know any alums from your own school, reach out to the clubs that you might be interested in and just ask them, hey, would anybody mind answering some questions for me? The worst thing that it can happen by asking questions on a subreddit or through Instagram or Twitter is to have them say no. And that's the worst thing that can happen. So always just, reach out and ask questions, especially if there's something you're not quite sure about to talk about. So I'm going to throw up Connie is saying she's choosing for CS between Brown and Cornell. So Connie, hopefully just by kind of talking overall, you're going to be able to be thinking a little bit more about what's going to work best for you. And at the end, we'll try to come in and maybe give some specifics about the colleges if we know anything. I can't tell you that I know much about their computer science programs. And let's see. Yuvraj says, can you talk about deferred enrollment? GWU admitted me to spring 23 for international affairs, meaning I attend community college for the fall. My gut tells me to go with GWU, but Rutgers in NB, what is NB? Do you know? It is great. I don't know what NB is.
Counts in.
Yeah, maybe he'll throw us that. But let's just take a minute here since he asked the question. Oh, New Brunswick. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay. So Nick, what do you think about deferred enrollment? Taking that option to do community college for a semester and then going on?
I mean, I think the question comes down to, if you really want to be at CMU, they're giving you a path to do that. At the same token, Rutgers is amazing. I lived in New Jersey for 4 years. So you got two really great options. I have had students who have done some sort of program like this. So famously, like Colby and Northeastern will say, before you come to the New England campus, you go abroad for a year. So I had a student do here at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, but even though it's a French-speaking province, it's an English-speaking university. He had a great time. I had another student she went to Trinity College in Ireland, and then she went to Northeastern. So it's interesting. Like I had actually one of my friends from high school. She did a Colby program, went to France the first year, and she said she was kind of like, frankly, a little bummed out. She's like, I really wanted to start, college and all this stuff, but she said I wouldn't have traded for the world because it was such a great experience. And that was a little bit different than a community college, but if you really want CMU, they're giving you an option to get there. But again, Rutgers is pretty rocking too, so I wouldn't write them off.
Yeah. So, and it's GWU for international affairs, which is just like an amazing option, right? Because you get to be in DC and you have all that access. So, I think it's definitely something you need to kind of weigh. I don't think that one semester delay is going to make that big of a difference probably for you. So I would probably just consider the financial aspect and then the other aspects, the programs offered, the vibe of the school, all the different parts of that, because that one semester is going to be over before you know it.
Right.
So yeah, you're pretty lucky to have those great options for sure. Let's see. Let me get Carly. Can you take that one down? Oh no, I got it. Here we go. Okay. So one thing that I often suggest to kids, because I can't know about every single college in the U.S. You probably know about far more than I do, but is like, no matter what the two colleges are, or 3 or 4, do pros and cons lists. And I actually like tell kids to take it old school, like get big sheets of paper and write pros and cons and put them up all over your room or your living room or your kitchen, whatever, and then just kind of add to them and subtract as you're thinking about it. To kind of like, and I tell kids to do this when they're thinking about early decision schools too, because really to me, to be able to visualize it can make a big difference, because you start to see pretty quickly, like which has like way more pros and way more cons. Now, some of the pros or cons might be a little more valuable than others, like finances. But, to kind of think about that. Do you have any like little tricks like that you can suggest to the kids out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. And sometimes it's weird because like I'm always railing against the rankings, but I sometimes tell students, make your own rankings, but based on criteria that matters to you. And it can be as simple as, like, of course you want to focus on academics and opportunity, all the good stuff, but it could be, I just want to go somewhere where I can ski.
Mm-hmm.
Criteria, or I've always wanted to live in Los Angeles. I mean, like whatever that is. And that's the thing too, is I often tell students, this is a time in your life where you have the option to kind of live almost anywhere you want to a large degree. So if you're really thinking about what's it like to live in a different part of the country, what's it like to go to a small town or a big city if I lived in the other one, but I would also say just think about like the different things that they're offering. Like I put financial stuff up there.
Mm-hmm.
College A has a really awesome study abroad program that's of interest to you. There's lots of things to kind of consider with that, but think about what's most important to you, and that can often help clarify it. But like we said earlier, even if the objective data that you write down kind of like might be showing you one thing or else, still go with that gut feeling.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You really can't say that enough. Like, I mean, when I figured out I wanted to go to Vanderbilt after I'd gotten in, I was just like, I was walking around, I was like, yeah, you know what, this is where I want to be. So you just go for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that something similar happened to my kids too when they were applying. Although I do have to say that all three of my kids were those last minute, I'm going to wait till the last day before I can have to have that pressure to make my decision. So if those of you who haven't made your decision yet, you're not alone. Here are just some other suggestions I have about it. Spreadsheets, often are really helpful. I have a spreadsheet I'll be happy to share with you with things that I like to kind of have students look at, but you can obviously make it your own. So if you just email me or reach out to me anywhere, I'll be happy to share it with you. And actually we'll probably just link it. Carly, let's remember to link it into the chat at the end, into the final chat, not this chat. And then the other thing that I heard this hint not about college admissions. It was about making decisions in general, but I think it can be really helpful to just think about this. And it's called the 10-10-10 test. And so ask yourself, how am I going to feel about this in 10 hours or 10 minutes, 10 hours, some relatively short period of time, right? And then how am I going to feel about it in 10 weeks or months? And then how am I going to feel in 10 years? And I think that can help you with perspective of thinking long-term about it versus and short-term. Some kids find that helpful, some don't, but it's kind of just another way to think about it and to kind of look at this decision in 10 years is going to have this impact on me. And maybe they'll all going to have this very similar decision, but I think financially, that's where you can really see the impact. Program wise, maybe you'll change your mind. And Nick, I'm going to stop and let you talk for a minute, and then we'll keep going here.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider. I mean, what's it going to look like later on? And I'll tell you one question that we sometimes get is if what I do undergrad, how is that going to affect my graduate applications later? Like,
yes.
Will I go to this school or whatever else? So I'll answer that by telling you a story. I always wondered what admissions officers did during the summer, and the answer is a lot of Netflix. So at Vanderbilt, we would have what were called update meetings, and we would sit in our conference room, and different offices from around campus would come and visit. So it'd be like the Women's Center, the Student Activities Office, Greek Life, Dining. So when we would recruit, we'd be able to speak to what was going on in those areas. So one day, Vanderbilt Medical School admissions came, and they gave 2 documents. And one document they said, here's all the undergraduate institutions that students applied to and were admitted to Vanderbilt Med School. And the other one was what they majored in. And what you find is the list of institutions all over the place. Yes, you saw some people who went to Vanderbilt undergrad. Yes, you saw some people who maybe went to an Ivy or something like that. But we had people, lots of great state schools, liberal arts colleges, wonderful places. We often talk about colleges that change lives. It's actually a college organization. I mean, lots of great places. And when you looked at the major, and I say this to my pre-med students all the time, there's a glut of biology and biomedical engineering and neuroscience, but they had different majors all over the place. There's no such major called pre-med. Any major can be pre-med. So you have public policy. How does the law affect my practice? Maybe I'm taking a language. I'm bilingual in the operating room. So there were lots of different paths there, but what it showed you It wasn't like if I go to X school, my chances at grad school are this much better. It's what they did with that undergraduate experience that made their application strong.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a great point. I'm about to pull up Jackie's question again about pre-med, because while we're on that topic. But I do think there are some considerations about certain schools. Like if you want to get a PhD, there are definitely schools out there who have a high percentage of their graduates go on to get PhD. Reed for one, St. John's College, some of those other liberal arts colleges. Because you do get so much undergraduate research and experience, and then you can get those strong letters. And I think something similar can happen for pre-med. I'm going to put Jackie's up there again. And Nathaniel's given her some good responses. So Jackie says, for pre-med, she's still got UT Austin, UC Davis, Tulane, Northeastern, UC San Diego. Financial aid's not different at all because of aid. That's interesting, though, because you've got two different states, but that's okay. Other than that, what would you pick? Well, I don't think we're not going to be able to pick for you, Jackie. You're going to have to pick for yourself with your family. But what I can tell you, also just kind of based on what Nick said, is that I do help some kids apply to med school. And so I've done some research very similar to what Nick was talking about with college, with med schools, and where the colleges where the kids have come from. What I found is that if you go to a smaller school where you can get some experience with professors in labs, that can make a big difference. Research is becoming more and more important for med school admissions. It wasn't even 5, 6, 7 years ago, but it's kind of really like amping up that it's almost an expectation now, in addition to great grades, great MCAT. So that's what I would be considering if I were you, is which school are you going to be more likely to be able to get some undergraduate real research experience and not just washing bottles for the grad students. And that you're going to have to figure that out on your own. The other thing is you can look at their med school acceptance rates. And when you do that, make sure that you're comparing apples to apples here, not apples to oranges. And what I mean by that is some colleges, when they send out med school application packets, they support everybody who wants to apply to med school, and some do not. So in their acceptance rates, some are going to be lower because they support every single person who wants to apply to med school, and some do not. So just another thing to think about when you talk to the pre-med advisor. And I would just reach out to the pre-med advisory program and all those colleges and ask them. I know lots of kids, because I'm in Houston, who have gone to UT Austin and gone on to med school. I mean, I can't see an issue there at all. I would definitely get some good liberal arts colleges in, good liberal arts classes in, and get some research. Tulane obviously is going to have great medical experience because you've got the Tulane hospitals where you can work there. Nick, any thoughts on her question here?
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think just one thing to really put a fine point on what Carolyn said. So when I've done mock admissions exercises, I actually have a student there's 3 students who are applying to a liberal arts college, and one of them is very pre-med, bio, like that's her. And what happens is, inevitably, when we're doing this mock admissions exercises, the people who are doing it, they'll say, well, we can't admit her. We're a liberal arts college, and she wants to do pre-med. And I think some people here at liberal arts colleges, they think liberal has something to do with politics, and it doesn't. And arts has to do with sciences, and that's not true at all. They have amazing science offerings. Like, true story, I actually was at Mount Holyoke this week, and there were these 2 students wearing, like, it looked like they were going clamming or something, but they were like doing some sort of biological research on the campus. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, but something aquatic. But nonetheless, it just shows you there's wonderful offerings. So to Carolyn's point, talk to the pre-med advisor and see how they get you prepared for those medical school apps after undergrad.
Yeah, and Nathaniel was kind of saying that at the same time. Check med school placement rates from those schools. That's really important for pre-med. So that's definitely something you want to get into. Just make sure you understand whether they support every application or just the ones that they decide to support. He also said, and I think this is important once you kind of got beyond the rest of it, it depends on your own criteria. Do you want to be in California? Do you want to be in Texas? Do you want to be in a city, or do you want to be in a huge school, a smaller one? Also, I don't know if you care politically about things, but there's pretty big differences politically about being in California or Texas, and if you're LGBTQ, you're safety wise, and all of that. So those are all kind of things to consider also as you're considering where you want to go and where you want to be. Great questions and great thoughts, by the way. Okay, and then we kind of come down. These last few are really kind of just all kind of summing up the gut feeling. And Jackie, this is probably where you're going to have to be at this point, because once you've done your research, once you've found, which ones have good med school placement, which one has, the opportunity to get the research, then you're going to have to kind of like go into this part. And this is the gut, and it all kind of is this. Tell a few people, how do you feel? Toss a coin, how do you feel? And Nick was talking about that too. So Nick, like any other ways to kind of like check your gut?
I would say spending time on campus and talking to students and talking to professors. Professors generally will like to geek out about whatever it is. And if you actually go to their office hours, or if you email them ahead of time, even if you're a prospective student or a student who's considering enrolling, oftentimes they'll be happy to speak with you, about that. But yeah, I would also say like it's kind of part of making the decision, also after you've made it. The one piece of advice I would give, like if I had to do college all over again, do more fun things, do more activities, do more research, like build that resume, polish that stuff up. It's funny, like I have like a couple of friends who are in journalism now, and they started off working at the student newspaper in college. So there are these stepping stones that you can do along the way, and that should be part of it too. Like, how are you going to use that place to get yourself successful for the next step? So I always look at career center, internships, research. Look at campus bulletin boards while you're there. I think Carolyn was right. Talk about the student newspaper. That to see what students are talking about. What's the pulse of the campus right now?
I love that point about using college, thinking about your next steps. I think that like I was really guilty of not doing that. Like I graduated from college not really having any clue what I wanted to do with my English major, other than be a writer, of course. But like that wasn't going to happen at 22 because I had to support myself. So my next choice was to become a teacher, which I then did for 30 years. But I think, kind of like taking advantage of what colleges have to offer you. And it's so much better now than it was, back in the 80s when I went. I'm going to throw up Jackie's question again. She has another one. Do you think opportunities will be better at private or public schools? This is for med school research, I think she's talking about. Jackie, what I usually tell kids is, to look for smaller private liberal arts colleges. That's where you can really get some hands-on research. All of yours are research universities. My suggestion is to do just what Nick said just a second ago and reach out to professors and ask them about research opportunities. Because all of those schools are going to have a lot of grad students doing research. Doesn't mean that they're not going to have undergrads doing it, but you're going to need to do that research and figure out on your own which ones may or may not have it. So look for schools that are, professors who are doing research that's interesting to you, and just reach out and ask them. It doesn't mean you have to do it with them, but just kind of get a feel for like, if they're like, no, like I really don't need undergrad researchers, then that kind of, if you ask 2 or 3, but if some are like, yeah, we love having undergrads, come on in, then you'll have a better idea. Any other things you think she could use to kind of help her evaluate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say, I don't think you could categorically say like private or public is better. It just depends on what they offer. When you're looking at the smaller colleges, and there are smaller public university or colleges as well, there's just not going to be as much competition, and you're not competing, with those grad students. So I think reaching out to, the professors right now and like looking at what they're doing. And I would also say, a little insider tip for anyone who's a junior or a sophomore, you can do now, because some of these places will ask you, why us? Why are you applying? And you don't want it to sound generic like everything else. So if you say, oh my goodness, like I'm a junior right now and I realize that, Professor Kaplan is the most amazing teacher I've ever had and I have to go work with her. You can use that in your why us essays, but that's also preparing you for when you're getting to this point next year and you're deciding whether or not you want to enroll.
Right, exactly. I think the more research you do on the front end, for your applications, which builds a better list, a stronger list, the more it's going to help you in the end. So let's see. And I think this question is totally normal. It's in VPAC, I guess is how I'm going to say that. What do we do if we are petrified in choosing a place of the totally wrong fit, like urban versus rural versus suburban? Like, what happened? Like, let's just talk about what happens, Nick, if a kid picks a place and it's wrong. It really doesn't feel right. What happens then?
I'll tell you, this is a very understandable fear. Lots and lots of students have it. And I will say, though, just kind of in my experience, is that it tends to be a little bit more amplified than it really happens in practice.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, full disclosure, like this time of year, myself and pretty much every other college counselor, we have students in tears. They're not happy with their choices. This is a nightmare. That's why we always say love your list on the front end. Like you should be able to find, some schools you absolutely are going to get into, they would be happy to attend. Like that there's tons out there.
Mm-hmm.
But, anyway, they might be really upset and disappointed right now. But you check in October, I would say 99 times out of 100, they're thrilled. I've often joked, high school's terrible. That's why God invented college. So
yeah,
that kind of thing. But what I'll tell you is that I have had students where, I talked about like that first week of classes, there's no one here like me. And I'll say, 6,000 students in undergraduate population, you need to look out a little bit more. But I think a lot of times, frankly, it's the novelty of it. It's not the college itself. It's just, I'm away from home. This is new. This is different. You have a lot more autonomy and sort of, I don't want to say free time, but you have a lot more like say in how you use your time. But what I usually do is I say, okay, let's give it a couple of months. If they're still upset after Halloween, then we think about a transfer app. But I mean, honestly, I've probably college counsel now about 1,000 students. I've had maybe one or two.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not. So I totally understand, that like the anxiety of like I don't want to make the wrong choice. But if you open up, if you look under the hood and you do these things that we're saying about like asking questions and thinking about what you like, you should be very happy.
Yeah, and I think if you think about it like this, like you're not going to make a wrong choice. You might make a choice that doesn't fit you right, but it's not the wrong choice because every choice you make, you're going to learn from. And so let's say you end up in a tiny little town in the middle of a Midwestern state and you get there and after 6 months, you're like, I cannot do this. I need a city. I didn't know that about myself. Or I can't stand to have cloudy skies in the Northwest. I need sun. I didn't know that about myself. So something like real, like you realize that like this is really not the right fit for you. You haven't made a wrong choice. What you've done is learn some really valuable information about yourself and you're going to make a change. And that's what life is about. Life is about learning about yourself and making decisions and choices and then making changes if they don't work out for you. So the worst thing that could happen, so you're petrified right now. Let's talk about the worst thing that can happen. This is what I like to do for myself. My children call it catastrophizing my life. But you know what? It works for me. So I'm going to share it with you. The worst thing that can happen is you're going to make the wrong choice. Like Nick said, you're probably not going to. 99 out of 100 times, you're not going to. Most kids end up happy where they go. But let's say you're one. That's the worst choice. You get there, you're miserable. You cannot make it work no matter how hard you try. And we're going to talk about how to make it, how to try. And so what you're going to do is you're going to transfer. And lots of kids transfer every year. It's another opportunity to learn about yourself and to find a place where you're going to feel and fit better. So I think if you look at it like that, it's just another way to learn more. It might help you. Best I can tell you right now. It is scary. Making choices, transforming your life, going from one thing that you're super comfortable with into something completely different is just kind of terrifying altogether. So, and then the fact that like you're wondering like, what is going to be the consequences of my choice, right? So I just saw, have you seen the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once yet, Nick?
I've not, no.
Oh my God, you've got to go see it. It's on the theaters right now. And it's basically about this lady making choices in her life. And so kind of, she's middle-aged, she's probably around my age, and now she's dealing with the multiverse. So it's like the different lives she is living in a multiverse with all her different choices that she's had. It's kind of, this makes me think of it. So like, like imagine that there is one of you who's like out there living all the different lives at these different colleges. I don't know what made me think of that. It's just kind of random. But go see the movie. Plug for the movie. Okay, so I'm gonna see what we have next here.
Carolyn, one thing I would.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So one piece of advice, like I think a lot of times colleges have been really good about having social media accounts where you can start to like meet friends and start to, that way when you get there, you're not experiencing the campus cold. I also tell students, I don't care which college you go to, first week, go up and down and shake hands with every single student on your floor, or do the COVID namaste if you want to do that. Those will be your friends. And it's weird because you have these conversations like, hi, you're from a totally different part of the country. Did you have friends where you lived? And they go, yeah, I did too. Do you want to be friends? And like, that's kind of how it starts off. The last thing I will say, and I've had, it's really interesting. So whether you're in a rural campus or an urban campus, you will find you spend most of your time on campus. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So at Vanderbilt, they used to call it the Vanderbubble. Oh, we never go out, leave the area and that kind of thing. And when I was a student, I was like, that's not true. We do that. And I literally lived 2 blocks from campus when I had graduated working in admissions. It's very different, you know, too, like on a college campus, your friends are there, your food's there, the parties are there, your classes are there. I had a friend who worked at Swarthmore right outside of Philadelphia. He goes, there's a train that will take them to downtown Philadelphia in 20 minutes. They never go.
Right.
So find that wherever you go, whether it's rural or urban, you're going to be in this little, you know, cluster, and that's fine. That's okay. Like that's.
Yeah. 100%. And I think you kind of leading me to a couple of thoughts. One thing is wherever you go, there you are. Like you're going to be with you wherever you are. So make sure that when you think you're running away from a campus, you're not really running away from yourself, because you're not going to be able to do that. So sometimes the work that needs to be done is to kind of like dig in and get to know yourself really well. Which leads me to my next point. We see every year on applying to college subreddit where kids are like, well, I'm just going to go here and I'm definitely going to transfer because I know I'm not going to be happy. Here's my advice to you. If you're thinking that, or if you're thinking, well, I can't make a decision, but I'm just going to transfer. If you want to transfer, you still have to do exactly what Nick said. You still have to make friends. You still need to have your dorm room open so other people can drop in and say hello. You still need to engage in your study groups. You still need to get to know your professors. You still need to join clubs. You have to completely engage, probably even more than if you don't think you're going to transfer, because you're going to need to get letters of recommendation. You're going to need to have excellent grades. You're going to need to have joined some clubs and been active on campus, because they are going to want to see what you have done with your time on the other college campus. And if you show up doing nothing because you were just hiding in your room waiting to transfer, you're not going to have very many transfer options. So be really careful to like totally engage, even if you think you're going to hate it. And usually when you do that, you don't hate it so much because you've engaged and you've built a life for yourself. So I think, thanks for bringing those points up, Nick, because those were really important points about, you know, going in thinking that you might want to transfer. Last point I want to make here before we kind of get off and talk about some other things and answer your questions is that I know that, especially, I don't know about in your school, Nick, but like where my kids went to school, where you were the college counselor, and on applying to college subreddit, people get really caught up in the name of a college, right? Like the name of the college becomes almost more important than anything else to the kids and the parents, let's be honest, right? And I just want to say, and I hope, you know, I know you'll back me up on this too, is that like the name of the college where you go does not define you. Yep. As much as you have been raised to think it does, as much as you have spent your high school career wanting a certain name or a handful of names, it does not define you. And I just really want you to hold on to that as you're making your decision. And Nick, how do you guide? I know at St. John's, when you were with my kids, you had that in a big way of families worrying about that. And I don't know about at your new school, but how do you guide students through that? Like getting over not getting the name or not being able to afford the name or going somewhere where they're like, the name isn't what they were planning on.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, Carolyn is keeping it real here, where I hear things like, especially working at, independent schools where the tuition is often $20,000, $30,000 or even higher. So, I'll hear comments like, why did I work so hard?
Mm-hmm.
What's the return on our investment? I've had that a couple of times. And I get it. So I'll never forget, like my former dean, he used to say, I absolutely understand why it matters so much, and I absolutely do not understand why it matters so much. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that kind of made a lot of sense. But it's really easy to get bogged down the hype. But I mean, for any parents listening out there, I mean, you think about it, like some of the most brilliant people you've ever met went to a college you perhaps have never heard of, and other people went somewhere bright and shiny, as I say, and they can't string two sentences together. So it's not about where you go; it's about what you do with it, and that's really been
100%.
again. So what I've often said to students is it is tremendously important that you take a 4-year degree. If you decide to go the college route, if that's not for you, believe it or not, even as a college counseling director, I'm the first person to say you don't have to go to college. If you're happy at a trade or something else, like by all means. But for those who do, it's important you get a 4-year degree. It's actually less important where you go than you believe. They've studied this. So that's really, really hard. But I'll give a great example. So, at the school that Carolyn's children went to that I worked at, it was a very prestige focused place with a lot of very, very smart students getting into a lot of really, really selected places. But I had one student, he was a national merit finalist, very Houston. He wanted to be an oil explorer, and so he went to University of Tulsa for free as a national merit finalist and got the best program and what he wanted to do. So he's going to probably have a 6-figure income as soon as he graduates, and in the stuff he wants. That's how you do it. That was really, really smart. So it's hard to get bogged down in it, but I'll also tell you too, like in high school, everyone's up in everyone's business and who's applying where and who got in there. When you get to whatever college you go to, you're going to compare notes about where you applied and where you got in and where you were thinking for about a week. And then after that, if you don't stop talking about it, you're that annoying kid who just can't let it go. So it seems like a big deal right now, and I get it. It's probably the biggest decision you've had to make on the 17, 18 years on this earth. But, parents think about it like there's way bigger decisions coming down the pike about jobs and family and marriage and all that good stuff. It's all coming down. But for right now, yeah, it's a big decision.
Yeah, and I was thinking about you, Nathaniel, while he was describing that kid. Nathaniel said, "That sounds just like me." LOL. So national merit and going where you got the best financial options. So yeah, for sure. And I think as you think about college admissions, and my kids went to really highly selective colleges. I don't ever try to hide that. But you know what? Like, one of my kids is going to be a doctor, so he's going to be okay. But 2 of my 3 kids are probably going to be struggling artists literally for the rest of their lives. I mean, I'm not lying. Like, the highly selective college did not create like these like crazy, amazing job opportunities for them and throw it upon them. My kids are going to have to work for it. And, they've chosen this life of an artist, and it's not easy. And just having gone to highly selective colleges isn't going to make it happen.
Yep.
Just, it's going to have to come from them. Another thing I wanted to talk about and think about for a second is when you went to Vanderbilt, what do you remember when you applied to Vanderbilt, what the acceptance rate was?
Yeah, it was roughly half. So it was 48, 52, percent admitted. Vanderbilt's class is 1,550 students. It's always been roughly that. And so the year I applied, so I was high school class of 2000, which dates me, but was also so cool. Basically, they got a little under 9,000 applications, to yield that amount, because not every kid they admitted is going to say yes, right? But as of last count, they were somewhere in the high 40,000s.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So when my son went to Vanderbilt in 2007, it was, I think, between 25 and 30% acceptance rate. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was around there. Like, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't get into Vandy right now. Do you think you'd be able to get into Vandy right now at their 9%, 6% accept rate, whatever it is?
At all. And also like I remember when I was in admissions there, and we were at a party with like friends from college and all this stuff, and I went around, I asked them a couple of questions, just some basic academic metrics, and I'm like, wow, my friends wouldn't have gotten in either. Like, wow. So and what's the reason for that? It's just because more students are applying, and I think what happened is with COVID, we were kind of trying to like theorize in my office what was going to be the application behavior of students. Are they going to go to their tried and true bread and butter, in-state institutions and the schools that they know really well, and or are they going to say, well, I'd have a shot at that really selective place, if not for my test score, and
Mhm.
and that's what happened. So I was talking to our rep at University of Miami in Florida last week. They're up to 50,000 apps. They jumped 8,000 apps this past year alone.
Right.
Students apply and quote, nobody gets in, so I have to apply to even more places because nobody gets in, and that's what's perpetuating. But there are hundreds and hundreds of great places out there. Even though I believe Black and Gold and I love Vanderbilt, my list would look very different if I had to do this again. And that's having done this for a couple of decades and visited hundreds of campuses and knowing kind of what I sort of see as important and stuff that I think people may focus on a little bit too much. But yeah, lots of places you can be happy, and that's something to just keep reminding yourself of.
Yeah. And so there were two thoughts I had, and I have to remember what they are now because I was listening to you. But one thought, and I'm going to go with this one for now, is that for parents out here watching our kids, to share with your parents, here's the advice I give parents, especially if they went to really highly rejective colleges. Research and figure out what the acceptance rate was to the colleges that you went to. And then try to find colleges in that range for your kids. Like if you went to Brown back in, 1985 and they had a 25% accept rate or whatever it was then, probably more, like, think about that range for your kid. Don't think Brown. Like kind of like open your brain to what it is that you were applying for. And there are so many amazing colleges in those ranges. And even a school with a 25% acceptance rate is going to be super, super highly selective, but it's not going to be ridiculous, right? Like, so kind of think about that as what you're looking for your kid. When I went to UT Austin in 1986, you literally had to be in the top half of your class and have a combined 800 on the SAT, and that was auto admit. And there were people in my high school who had to go to summer school because they weren't auto admit. So think about that. Oh, I'm sorry, not top half of your class. And I think it was top half of your class, or now you have to be top 6%. Oh, I know what my other thought was. In addition to the test scores, I think another real something that I saw a lot on the subreddit and by talking to kids is the amount of virtual admissions opportunities that the kids could attend because of COVID. So kids who normally would not have been able to get on a campus or go to an info session suddenly had them all available to them. And so their eyes were opened up to way more colleges than had been available to them. And so I don't think it was just test scores that drove up the numbers. I think it was also just like all the online planning and resources that were like all of a sudden super available. It was just a point I wanted to make. So thinking about that, that's why I wanted to ask you about Vandy and just like, yeah, do you think you'd get in? Because like, I know that if I were applying to college right now as the high school student I would be looking at tiny liberal arts colleges with really high acceptance rates, or big state universities with really high acceptance rates. Not UT Austin for sure. It wouldn't be an option for me.
Yep.
And forget about something like Vanderbilt. That wouldn't even be close to an option for high school me. Cool. You touched on waitlists. So if we have anybody out there who's with us today, who's thinking about waitlists, or anybody who is watching, tomorrow or in the future, let's talk about waitlists for a minute. I did a whole show on it a few weeks ago, but I think it's always good to kind of like retouch it for those kids who are out there waiting on waitlists. And I'd love to hear your advice to people on the waitlist.
Yeah, a couple of things here. So there's a couple of myths, and there's stuff that we can control a little bit, and there's stuff that we can't control. So a question that's very common is the waitlist ranked? I don't know where this came from. I've heard it every year. There's never been any evidence. Not a single officer's ever told me. What it does, and Carolyn probably talked about this in her session, like it fills gaps in the class. So as officer, you might say, well, this student's great, but we have other students who are just a little bit stronger for us right now. We're going to give them first dibs. If we need students who have higher test scores, more male students, more female students, more students from the west of the Mississippi or the east of the Mississippi, or international students, we need more engineers. So it just depends on what they get from that class. Now, parents, I think you can probably relate to the difficulty deans of admissions have in predicting how literally thousands of teenagers with parents are going to be responding to an admissions offer. So they're just trying to see what's going on in terms of like who's still interested, where they need have gaps in the class. So I would say roughly half of the students offered a waitlist offer, and this depends on school, but just roughly about half say no, thank you. I've decided I'm going somewhere else, and that's it. But the ones who do remain waitlist active. So if they're looking for engineers and you're arts and science, you may not be coming off the wait list. But if you're looking for those any holes in the class, that's where they might want to see it. Colleges, what I've noticed is like Villanova famously had a very, very transparent FAQ. Here's how it works. Here's how it doesn't work. I often recommend writing a letter of continued interest, just telling them. Sometimes colleges will actually give you a form like, and hey, if you're still interested, tell us why. And that's when where I'll say, really importantly, be specific. That's where we talk about name the professor. Don't say I want to join the student newspaper. Name the student newspaper. Also, please do not start your letters of continued interest off as one of my seniors did 2 weeks ago. Now that I've been waitlisted, I decided to learn more about your school. Now, since being waitlisted, so just a little semantics, and that's why we say, run it by a teacher or a counselor or what have you. Just little things like this. You just want to say like, well, I was disappointed to not be offered admission. I'm still encouraged to still have a shot. This is what I like. If you have some updates too, like new grades, you just did a project, got an award, you can update that as well. So that if and when the stars align and you fit the criteria of what they need, they're going to have you in mind as a possible person to nominate to come off the wait list.
Yeah, that's all great information. And thank you for just like reaffirming everything. I think our waitlist live stream was maybe 3 weeks ago, but you can go find it. It's called Let's Talk About Waitlist. So it's easy to find. And in there, I have a lot of resources kind of just like detailing how to write a Loki, pretty much just kind of reiterating everything Nick says. Creating an image of you on their campus with detail. Okay, so that's it for today as far as talking about applying to college, talking about making your decision. Those of you in the chat, thank you so much for being here with us and for asking your questions. You had some amazing questions. And because this is my whole live stream thing is about like talking about applying to college, but also we stop and take a breath. I think it's really important in college admissions because it is stressful and it's overwhelming all the way through. And it's really important that we stop and take a breath. And Nick has very, very kindly agreed to lead our 1-minute meditation today. So I'm going to give that over to you, Nick. Carly, do you want to jump on with us or how do you feel about that?
Sure.
Okay, great. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you to lead us for last minute.
So I've actually done this with my students at the high school. So
great.
Now put your feet flat on the floor. Then put your hands somewhere that just feels comfortable, either on your knees. You can fold them over your abdomen. And if you want to close your eyes, that's okay. Focus on the room. What do you hear? Do you hear nature? Do you hear white noise? Just let your mind just be. If a thought comes in, say, we're going to clear it out right now. Just focus on just being grounded right in the moment. Take a deep breath in and hold. And then release. Deep breath in. Hold. And release. And just take a moment to check in on how you're feeling right now. You might be excited. You might be wary about where you're going to go or what you're going to do. But just check in on yourself, see how you feel. And then take one more deep breath. And if you close your eyes, you can open them now.
Oh, thank you, Nick. That was great. I know that even though I'm not the one applying to college right now, I get kind of like wrapped up in the stress and the anxiety of, what's happening with the students, whether they're my online students or my, students I see in person. And it's so important, that we stop and take a breath. I love that you do that with your students in the school.
Yeah. There's one of my best friends, she's a math teacher, and she's doing like all the courses on meditation stuff. So we talk about all the time. But we've led the students in it over the PA, and they really like it, so it helps.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, so thank you everybody for being here with us. Thank you, chat. Thank you, Nick. Nick, I'm going to end the broadcast, but come say goodbye to me off the broadcast and for just a second, okay? So thank you all. Thank you if you're watching in the future. Thank you all for who you are here with us. And thank you, Carly. Thank you, Nick. And I'm going to end us now. Bye.
Everyone.